Hey there, alchemist. Welcome to our Defy Gravity Rainbow Series. And we call it the Rainbow Series because we are going into an element of our own energetic system. We call them the chakras. Now, within our energetic system, we have what we call the shadow and the grace. Now, our shadow is the area that holds the wounds, right? The part of us that needs healing. Okay, so it's a wound that has not been tended. Now, an unhealed wound, it affects how we show up into our life. I mean, imagine somebody has a broken leg and they have to have a cast. And so they may not be able to drive their car. They may not be able to get up the steps outside of their house, right? Because the broken leg, because of it's broken, it affects how they show up in their day. I had a paper cut on the inside of my thumb last week, and it was tiny. It was so tiny, but it still affected how I did things during the day. Every time I would try to grab something, it would hurt, like it would send shooting pains up my arm practically, right? Even a tiny, itty bitty little wound can still affect how we show up for life. So we'll know that we are living in our shadow or our wound because it also affects how we live our life. We'll live through a mistaken perception of who we really are. And we'll probably say things like, oh, this never works out for me. I always have the worst luck. I don't think I could handle that. I'm not good enough for that. Nobody likes me. I don't have anybody that has my back. Life is so unfair. I am powerless. But the wound is also the place where the light enters in, and it is grace that brings that light. It is grace that brings the path to healing. So, as we are living our life, we see the world as a mystic, that we see that God is all, right? The all is all. Everything that's ever been and everything that's yet to be, including each and every one of us. We all have the spark of the divine within us, no matter how we eat, vote, pray, or parent. And then we act in the world as an alchemist. We stand in our authority. We decide. We know it's on us. So we decide right this minute to stand in our authority and choose how we're going to show up in our day. We'll choose to notice our wounds and tend them. This is how we transmute the metaphorical lead, right? Or the weight of our suffering that we carry around and slows everything down because it is so heavy. So we transmute the lead into the gold. And this is how we defy gravity, because we release the weight of our suffering and we fly. So today, I'm going to talk about how we rise from the dark night of the soul. Now, the dark night of the soul was first identified by the Carmelite monk John of the Cross in the 1500s. And so it's been around a while. Okay, it's been around a while. People have been experiencing the dark night for centuries. Okay, but nowadays, spiritual crisis has become so common in our society that is now actually part of our spectrum of health challenges. And it requires a knowledgeable caregiver that will provide or help us identify if we are actually in a spiritual crisis or a psychological or emotional crisis. Now, the signs of being in a dark night would be feeling powerless, feeling inconsolable, meaning if we're inconsolable, it's like, life's not fair, nothing ever works out, why do I even try? Okay, we'll feel the unfairness of life, but the biggest thing is that we will feel disconnected from our source. And this is where our suffering actually starts, our disconnection from our source. So, really, the dark night, if we're in a dark night of the soul, which I've been in a few times, but what's happening is we are living out of congruence with our divine self. We're not living an authentic life. A dark night is an invitation to find the divine within us. Now, St. John of the Cross said this: God leads into the dark night those whom he desires to purify from all these imperfections so that he may bring them farther forward. Now, when he's saying farther forward, what he's talking about is living a life of meaning and purpose. Hey, good girl, my dog. So to live a life of meaning and purpose, what John of the Cross says is that we need to be purified of the 7 dark passions. Now, we talked about these in the Rainbow series, right? We talked about them in relation to the shadow in each of the chakras. Okay? Now, St. John of the Cross calls these 7 dark passions arrogance, greed, entitlement, wrath, gluttony, right? Or what we might have said was overconsumption or addiction. He talks about envy and sloth, which we talked about sloth as being the shadow where we postpone our good. Now, what's interesting is that the purification process, right, when we rise from the dark night, this is actually the process of rebirth, right? It's rebirth. Now, one of the stories that I love about rebirth, okay, means if we're being reborn, it means we die first and then we're reborn. But I'm going to share one of my favorite stories, and it may not be the story you think it is. It's actually the story. It took place around 4,000 years ago. And it is the story of 2 sisters, Inanna, who's also known as Ishtar, and her sister Ereshkigal. Now, Inanna was the queen of the heavens, and Ereshkigal was the goddess or the queen of the underworld. Now, Inanna was not the best sister, and she was really focused on having things her way and having what she wanted, and war and whatever. And because of Inanna's actions, Ereshkigal's husband gets killed. So Inanna decides to travel to the underworld to attend the funeral of her brother-in-law. However, when Inanna arrives in the underworld, Ereshkigal hears of this, and she's really angry. So she tells her servants to make Inanna pass through 7 gates. And all the gates are locked until Inanna gets to the next gate. Now, at each of these gates, Inanna is required to remove one of her royal garments. So she's stripped of her crown, her beads, her ring, her scepter, and finally her clothing. And at each gate, she asks, what is the meaning of this indignity? Okay, but she finally gets through the 7th gate into the throne room where she is now nude, and she bows humbly to her sister. Okay, so this is a humbling experience for Inanna. But Ereshkigal has Inanna judged and found guilty of, I don't remember the crimes, but, being a horrible person. And so Inanna is killed, and Ereshkigal puts her in a tomb somewhere in a room, hanging on a hook. Yeah, okay. Well, Inanna foresaw that something like this could happen, and she had instructed one of her servants what to do. The servant sent 2 what are called Gala to fetch Inanna. Now the Gala, they go down into the underworld, and they find Ereshkigal. Now, Ereshkigal is in the pain of childbirth, but she's wailing, not just from the pain, but also from wrath of losing her husband. She's alone, delivering a baby. Her sister did all these things and doesn't even seem to care, right? Now, these 2 beings, the 2 Gala, they sympathize with her. They empathize with her pain, and they see her, and they tell her, we are so sorry. This is horrible what has happened to you. This is not fair. You are suffering so, and we see you, and we hear your cries. Now, they have so much compassion and mercy for Ereshkigal that she finally feels heard, seen, and supported. And she is so grateful she gives them Inanna. And they take Inanna and they go back into the heavens. Inanna rises from the dead. Okay? Now, this is a story of a transformational healing experience. But it wasn't experienced by Inanna. She went back to doing what she always did, right? It was this transformational healing experience was experienced by the sister in the shadow, the underworld, okay? Inanna represents the heavens or the light. Ereshkigal Kegel represents the wound in the shadow. Now, there's some interesting points in this story, I believe, that first of all, Inanna has to be made to be humble, right? To travel through those 7 gates. Well, the 7 gates are about aligning our thoughts with the thoughts of the divine. Okay, it's about harmony. This is heaven on earth. Heaven on earth is when our thoughts are aligned with the thoughts of God. But Inanna had to be made humble. Well, we also sometimes have to be made humble. And often where we have to be made humble is that we think we know how things should be so that we can be happy, right? We think we know what we require so our life will be good, okay? Now, this is something that we just really don't always know, right? If we want these conditions to change, to be a certain way, so then we can be happy. Well, living in this mindset, of course, means we're constantly manipulating conditions because conditions aren't going to line up just to make us happy, right? And making conditions change so we can be happy, it requires 0 faith. Healing transformation requires that we are living our lives in faith. So we have to let go of this idea that we think we know best. We also will have to let go of a need to know the reason why something happened. You know, I spent many years of my life wondering why didn't I ever know my biological father? Or why did my, whatever happen? And you know what? I never got a reason why ever, right? And so closure, an idea of closure is great. Sometimes we want closure so that we can do something that's very necessary to healing, which is practice forgiveness. But forgiveness is not a reasonable action. Forgiveness is a mystical action, meaning we have to live in faith. We have to have faith to actually forgive. So we have to let go of needing the reasons why. We need to let go of this idea of getting closure so we can forgive, right? And you can think of the story Job, which I think is in our third episode of our Rainbow series, okay? We also have to let go of a need for justice or payback. And I know there are things that have happened in your life, maybe, that were just so terrible, and it would be nice to get some justice. And probably all your friends and loved ones think, man, wouldn't that be great if you could get justice? But we don't always get that, right? So we have to be able to let go of that. We also have to let go of this need to have the guarantees before we act on our intuition. Again, intuition, acting on our intuition is an act of faith. Having the guarantee, that's our reasonable mind wants the guarantee. But see, the reasonable mind cannot guide us out of our comfort zone. Our reasonable mind cannot send us down a brand new path. Okay? Intuition, divine guidance coming through intuition is what does that. So what we're basically doing is we're letting go of these beliefs that keep us from experiencing harmony in our own way. We are shedding our own royal garments and going through these 7 gates so that we can align our thoughts with the thoughts of the divine. Now, something else I think that's interesting in this story is Ereshkigal is in the pain of childbirth. Of course, childbirth is extremely transformational. And even symbolically, it represents healing transformation. Right? Now, Ereshkigal heals because the Galas in the story acknowledge all of her pain. They see her, they hear her, and they have compassion and mercy for her. Sometimes, well, all the time, we have to face what's in our own wounds. We have to face it. We have to have compassion for ourselves. We have to have a little mercy for ourselves. And if we can get somebody else to witness it with us, I mean, that's great. But oftentimes, we're doing it on our own. Now, also, Inanna was in the underworld for 3 days, right? 3 days in the tomb or the underworld is representative of a peaceful, receptive consciousness where healing can now be unobstructed because in this 3 days, which is a metaphorical or metaphysical 3 days, the higher mind can go to work, right? I read this quote recently. You've heard this before. Darkness is not the absence of light. It is the absorption of light. And I was thinking about how when we can be humble and let go of the ideas that we know best, that we can acknowledge our pain, tend to our pain, care for our pain, that's when we can rest in that peaceful, receptive consciousness and let our higher mind go to work. Now, Carolyn Mace says this: the dark night is not an experience to be treated, but one to be examined and understood as a progression of self-realization and illumination in the deepest sense of what it means to come to know one's inner self. To know our inner self is to have awareness of our wounds and tend them. To know our inner self is to have awareness of our light, our divine nature, and live that truth. This means seeing the all in all. This means accepting everyone as an expression of the all, not just the people that are easy to love, not just the people who eat, vote, pray, and parent in ways that we approve of. To live in awareness of our divine truth, our inner light, we also accept that all the obstacles and challenges that we face, they can help us discover more of who we really are, right? These challenges we go through, they can help us understand at a deeper level the true fullness of our being as expressions of the all. Of course, we're not always ready to live at that level of consciousness, right? To have to keep seeing God in everyone, right? That can be very, very challenging, especially if we are faced with somebody we don't care for. And we're also not always ready to take responsibility for where we are right now in our lives. And it just feels easier to blame somebody else for our problems and complain about them, right? So we're not always ready to step up and be a participant in our life. And we're choosing to be a bystander. We're making the choice to postpone our good. But there does come a point in our lives when we gain awareness and we cross a Rubicon. Because we have this awareness and we can't become unaware. And that awareness truly is that God is all things. And that means me. And I create my experiences through my way of thinking and acting. And affirmative prayer and meditation help me to align more deeply with the divine within. And knowledge of these principles is not enough. We must live them. Okay, we can decide that it's too hard. We want to judge somebody. We want to blame somebody. But see, at this point, we are consciously postponing our good and weighing ourselves down with our own suffering, right? So that's what we're doing. If we consciously decide, nah, I just can't do this right now. Of course, we know the easiest thing in the long run is to accept our life as a sacred assignment and consciously step into our divinity, our authentic self, right? To consciously step into the truth that we are created in the image and likeness of our Creator. And as the universe creates in the universal, we are creating in the package of our own life. And this is how we are defying gravity. See, we are never really ourselves until we think and act from love. until we think and act from our divine nature. So our call to action this week, we'll start with our affirmation. I am a physical expression of the divine. I am a physical expression of the divine. You could also say, I am the heart and hands of God in this world. I am source energy in a body, right? Any of those affirmations will work. Now, affirmations are really helpful to us because they help us reprogram a way of thinking. For example, I know for myself how often I might say something like, boy, I just can't even manage this. This is really hard. I am so overwhelmed. So the more I say that, the more I'm programming it into my brain, and my brain's saying, yeah, you're right. Let me show you why this is true. So the more that we say, I am the activity of source in a body. I'm the activity of source in a body. I'm an expression of the divine walking around on this planet right now. The more we say that, our brain goes to work. It's like, you're right. Let me show you why this is true. Now, this is helpful because a dark night of the soul is not something that just happens overnight. It is something we descend into because we are living out of congruence with ourselves at soul level, right? We're living out of congruence with our divine nature. Okay, we're not being authentic. We're worrying about what other people think about us. Now, what happens is our environment will constantly challenge us. There will be something put in our path, and our automatic response might be, oh, here's a challenge. That's not fair. Why does this always happen? This happened again? I can't do anything about this, right? Our environment will constantly challenge us. It's all part of the game, all right? So to play this game, we create for ourselves a spiritual fitness practice, cultivating all the graces. Because when we actively cultivate grace, this strengthens our spiritual backbone, right? But we have to constantly work at it because, again, our environment will constantly challenge us. So here's our invitation for this week, right? We ask a question over and over again. The divine will respond, right? You'll get your higher self, your higher mind. It's going to have an answer for you. So here's a good question we can ask. How can I cultivate my graces? Right? How can I cultivate my graces so I'm developing a strong spiritual background? Right? Do I live my life in wisdom or woe? Right? If something happens, do I say, oh man, that's so unfair? We spiral into victim consciousness. Or do we say, oh man, this again? So what am I going to do about it? What am I going to do about it? If I really am divinely guided, like what's the next thing? Right? If God is all things and that means me, then like how can I show up to this in an unexpected way? Right? How can I discover a solution to this? How can I get curious about what's happening in my life? Right? Or this question, how can I be of service to others so that I can demonstrate how the divine unfolds through us? How can I be of service to others? And now here, this is really important to know the distinction between being of service or servitude. When we're in servitude, often, even though we might think we're being of service, we are actually spreading a poison. If we're in servitude, we're probably acting resentfully. We're acting like, oh, it's not fair, I'm stuck doing this. And then whoever it is we're serving, they'll feel the toxicity of it. They'll feel the toxicity of it. It won't feel like service to them. Being of service is not about what we do. It is about how we do it. Because all we're really doing is we're demonstrating how the divine unfolds through us, how it unfolds through everything, right? And everything we are doing on this planet right now, everything we are learning on this planet right now is all about that. Everything we're doing is all about showing that the divine is at work in everything. It is unfolding through us, and it is unfolding through everything in our environment, every condition, every person. And we're remembering this, we are demonstrating this, because this is how we are creating heaven on earth. So until next time, remember that you are divinely designed to be doing all of this. You are a one-time, one-of-a-kind cosmic event. In everything you do, you are blessed, and so it is. We'll see you next time.